I didn't lose my voice the day I heard them. I found my evidence. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and lemon, the kind that pretends everything is clean even when nothing is. I was standing outside the ultrasound room with a printout of my son's profile still warm in my hand. A nurse had just said, "It's a boy," and my heart had done that tiny flip people talk about. The one that makes you picture a crib against a sunlit wall and a pair of tiny socks that never seem to stay on. The door clicked behind me, and I stepped into the corridor to call my mom, to tell her she'd been right all along about the name we'd argued over. That's when I heard the voices, my husband's low and careful, and a woman's whisper he used to call friendly. The kind of whisper that bends the air, that thinks walls are allies. "We have to be more careful," he said. "She's getting suspicious." 4 words rearranged my life. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at a poster about hand washing and memorized the pattern of the blue cartoon soap bubbles, because staring at something harmless felt like the only way not to fall. The woman giggled, Jenna's pitch when she was trying to make a hard thing sound pretty. "It's only a few more months," she said. Then she didn't finish. She didn't have to. I had the ultrasound in one hand and my phone in the other, but I didn't press record. I didn't barge in. I did what my grandmother once told me to do when a snake crosses the road. Freeze, learn its pattern, let it pass, and remember which way it went. By the time I walked back into the exam room, my smile worked. I told the technician, "Thank you." I tucked the images into my purse like they were fragile glass. I texted Mark, "I'll meet you by the elevators." And then I counted to 100 because I needed my face to be calm. He joined me with that grin that used to feel like safety. He kissed my forehead and touched the corner of the envelope where our son was already printed in black and white. "We should celebrate," he said. "There's a new taco place on South Lamar. We can drive by the baby store after." His voice was steady. Practice does that. On the drive home, he talked about names in baseball and whether Austin traffic would be easier if we moved south to be closer to my school. He thought out loud about paint colors, the kind of ordinary future that floats like a balloon to distract a child. I watched the mile markers slip by and took mental notes. Time, place, the exact phrasing, the text message he sent later to stay late at the office. I did not argue. I did not accuse. I put the ultrasound picture on the fridge when we got home, right between an expired coupon and a wedding magnet from a couple we no longer see. I boiled pasta and added jarred sauce and pretended the smell of garlic could drown out the hospital hallway. That night, sleep was not a thing my body remembered how to do. I lay on my side the way the nurse recommended, palm on the small rise of my belly, counting the seconds between the AC turning on and off. There was a time I would have woken Mark and said, "Something's wrong," and he would have put his hand over mine, and we would have solved it together. That time had a timestamp now. I got up and went to the dining table where a stack of graded spelling tests sat under my laptop. I opened a blank document and titled it, "For later, Elena." Not evidence, not divorce, just my name. Then I wrote bullet points like I was preparing a lesson plan. Hospital corridor, post-ultrasound. "We have to be more careful," male voice. "She's getting suspicious," female voice. Implication? Ongoing. I wrote down dates that suddenly made sense. Mark's surprise work trip to Houston that coincided with Jenna's weekend away to her cousin's lake house. The concert I couldn't attend because of parent conferences. The restaurant where he couldn't remember what he'd ordered, which is how I knew he hadn't been there at all. In the morning, I made coffee and packed a lunch. I stared at the ultrasound again until the tiny curve of his nose made my chest hurt. When Mark came into the kitchen, his hair was damp, and his tie matched the socks he always joked were his grown-up socks. He kissed me cheek quick and said he'd be late. There was a client call, something about a deliverable. "Of course," I said. "Drive safe." The words tasted like paper. He looked at me a second too long, like he wanted to read my mind. If he had read it, he would have seen a ledger filling line by line. At lunch, I texted Jenna, "Coffee? Been a minute." 5 p.m., Violet Crown? She sent back 3 hearts and a yes, please. She always used hearts for me because that's what best friends do. They brand the small talk with affection. In the hours between, I taught a phonics lesson on the difference between there, and my voice did not shake. Violet Crown was dim and smelled faintly of cinnamon. I chose a table with a clean sightline to the door. Jenna arrived in a dress I had helped her pick last spring when she got the promotion. Green, with tiny white flowers that made it look like it belonged in a field and not in a downtown coffee shop. She hugged me and pressed her cheek to mine and said, "You look beautiful." Her eyes drifted down to my belly with practiced warmth. "How's my little nephew?" I put a hand on my stomach because that had become a reflex. Protective, anchoring. We ordered oat milk lattes like always, and I asked about work. She told me about a coworker who overused exclamation points. I told her about a student who wrote a poem about his dog and made everyone cry. We laughed at the right moments. When she excused herself to the restroom, her phone lit up on the table. A preview banner read a name I recognized too well. Mark. The irony was almost elegant. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. When she came back, I asked casually if she'd been to the lake house lately, the one her cousin rented out for weekends. "Not in months," she said, too quickly, then smiled to cover the seam. "Why?" I shrugged and mentioned the restaurant by the water with the good hush puppies, and she said, "Oh, I love," and stopped herself like she'd tripped over a rug she forgot she'd rolled out herself. She asked about baby names to change the subject, and I let her, because people tell you who they are when you don't interrupt. After coffee, I didn't go home. I drove to my mother's house in South Austin, the one with the porch swing I painted yellow in college, and the rosemary bush that refuses to die. Mom opened the door before I knocked, as if she knew the exact rhythm of my footsteps on the driveway. Her hair was pinned up, and there was a smear of flour on her cheek from the pie she was pretending she hadn't made for no reason. "What did he do?" she asked softly, because mothers skip the preface when it's their child at the door. I didn't cry. I told her the hallway words, and the green dress, and the text preview, and the lake house, and how I had not screamed because screaming would have given them a story to deny. She put her hands on my shoulders and said, "We build now. We don't burn." We made a list at her kitchen table with the pie cooling between us. Step 1. Call Laura, my mom's quiet friend from church, who happened to be a family lawyer with a spine of steel and a voice like a lullaby. Step 2. Move a bag into the guest room so I could rest without sleeping next to a man who had made a stranger of himself. Step 3. Schedule a conversation with Mark on neutral territory. Mom's living room, not our house. So I wouldn't be tempted to throw a plate just for the music of it. Mark came that evening because I asked him to, and because curiosity is stronger than shame at first. He sat on my mom's couch like he didn't know where to put his hands. I told him we needed to talk, and he said, "You're scaring me," which used to be the spell that would make me soften. Not that night. I told him I'd heard him in the hallway. I repeated his exact phrasing because precision is a scalpel. We have to be more careful. She's getting suspicious. I watched the micro expressions I'd read about in articles he'd mocked. How the mouth presses flat. How the eyes blink a count too fast. He said, "You must have misunderstood." I said, "I didn't misunderstand." I recognized her voice too. He closed his eyes, the kind of theatrical moment a person uses when they're deciding which version of themselves to be. He tried denial because denial is step 1 in the handbook. He tried offense. Why was I listening? He tried pity, He was stressed. He'd been feeling unseen. He was an idiot. Insert adjective here. I let him run the list, and when he paused, I pulled out my laptop and opened the document titled with my name. I read the dates and the times and the small tells, perfume that wasn't mine, a receipt from a bar that wasn't on his route home, a charge on our joint credit card in a city Jenna had posted about on Instagram. He stared at the screen like it was a test he hadn't studied for. He said, "This isn't who I am." And I said, "It is for now." The room was so quiet, the old clock on the mantel sounded like a metronome we'd all forgotten to stop. I told him I was moving into my mother's guest room for the time being. I told him Laura would be contacting him with a temporary plan for finances and communication. I told him I wouldn't be discussing any of this by phone, only email, because that's how you keep a record. He asked if Jenna had told me. "No," I said. "You did." He looked small in that minute, which is not the same thing as repentant. He asked to see the ultrasound photo again, like holding it would make him realign. I said no. Boundaries have to be sentences, not size. After he left, I slept for 4 hours straight in Mom's guest room, which felt like the kind of miracle we dismiss because it doesn't come with trumpets. In the morning, I called Laura. She listened the way professionals do, non-reactive and thorough. She asked whether I felt physically safe, whether there had ever been shouting that crashed into anything. I said no, that I didn't fear his hands, only his decisions. She laid out a plan like a path you can follow in the dark, a temporary separation agreement, a schedule for appointments and classes, and later, visitations. All communication via email, she repeated. No midnight calls, no ambushes on the driveway. Keep your pulse slow. This is a relay, not a sprint. Days lengthened in that way pregnancy makes them. I taught my students to write similes while I relearned how to measure time in something other than betrayal. I ate crackers at my desk and found that I could laugh at 7-year-old jokes that used the word underpants as punctuation. I watched the ultrasound image on my phone before bed to remind myself that my body was doing 2 jobs, keeping a baby alive and not letting rage make me a room he shouldn't have to grow in. Mark emailed. He apologized in sentences so careful they felt wrung out. He wanted to talk in person, off the record. I replied with 3 lines. Email suits me. Here are the dates Laura proposed for the next doctor's appointments. Then I copied Laura on the thread. He switched to logistics because that's where our conversation could safely live. People can learn, or they can at least pretend long enough for a paper trail. One afternoon, a week before I was due, I drove back to our house while Mark was at work to pick up a few books I missed and the blue blanket my aunt had knitted. I stood for a moment in the doorway of what was supposed to be the nursery. The walls were still the color of renters, tolerant beige, but the sunlight made a pale gold. I sat in the rocking chair and counted my son's kicks. They were steady, like the clock on Mom's mantel. I whispered to him the thing I had started saying without planning it. You are wanted. You will be safe. Then I locked the door behind me and left the key with Laura to handle as part of the inventory. Rituals matter even when they are quiet. The night my labor started, I felt it the way a tide sneaks up on your ankles while you're staring at a horizon too far to be helpful. It wasn't dramatic. It was a whisper first, then a shrug, then a certainty. Mom timed the contractions while I folded and refolded a tiny onesie with rockets on it. In triage, a nurse asked if my partner was coming, and I said, "My mother is with me," which was the truest thing I could have said. Between contractions, I stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about how the same building can hold beginnings and endings and not change its shape at all. Mark arrived at the hospital lobby an hour after we checked in. He didn't come up. He texted that he was there if I wanted him, that he could wait, that he understood if I didn't. I let the phone face down on the side table and breathed through a wave that felt like a planet tilting. A nurse with kind eyes squeezed my hand and said, "Almost there," I said. I know. When Lucas was placed on my chest, the world shrunk until it was just the weight of him and the way his mouth made a perfect O, like he was surprised to be here. I cried then, not because I was sad, but because my body finally had permission to let go of the day at the hospital corridor and the coffee shop and the living room confrontation and all the minutes I had held everything still. He was warm and impossibly real. I whispered his name and felt the syllables land like small anchors. The next morning, I filled out paperwork that had boxes for things like father present and last name. I checked the boxes that made sense for the day we were actually living, not the one I had planned. When the nurse asked if I wanted to admit visitors, I said no. I asked for 2 extra blankets instead and made a little nest for us under the 2 bright lights. Lucas slept with one fist pressed against his cheek like a boxer who has already won. Mark sent another text. I'm in the lobby with coffee. I can leave it with the front desk. I typed back, thank you. Front desk is fine. My mother took the elevator down and returned with a cup and a paper bag. Inside were 2 muffins and a note that said, I'm sorry. I'm trying. Trying is a verb, but verbs need sentences, and sentences need structure. I put the note in the folder Laura had told me to keep for communications of interest, and then I ate half a blueberry muffin because grief and hunger aren't mutually exclusive. When we were cleared to go home, I buckled Lucas into the car seat with the kind of terror that makes you triple-check every strap. The highway felt louder than usual. My mother drove slower than she ever has in her life. In the rearview mirror, I watched Lucas sleep and thought, we are going to be fine. Not because a movie told me so, or because a quote on a mug promised it, but because I had already done the hardest part. I had chosen the quiet path, the one that looks like weakness until you get close enough to see the iron in it. The first week home was a mosaic of small victories that would never trend on anyone's feed. Lucas learned to hiccup like a metronome. I learned that the dryer eats newborn socks unless you pin them in pairs. Mom learned to sleep in 90-minute islands between oceans of wakefulness. The house smelled like laundry and lavender. When the nurse called to check in, I told her I was okay, and for once the word didn't feel like a costume. Okay can be a floor, not a ceiling. Laura filed the temporary orders. The document was short, clean lines and clear rules. Financial support calculated by formula. Communication limited to email. No unscheduled visits. Any in-person handoff, if needed later, would be in public places with cameras. Structure is care, Laura said, and I believed her the way you believe a pilot when the ride gets bumpy. Mark signed without arguing, which surprised me until I realized that the alternative required a stamina he didn't have. He wrote to me most mornings. The emails were tidy, as if the font itself could apologize. How is Lucas sleeping? Is he nursing well? Do you need anything from the house? I answered with facts and attached photos of feedings and weight checks the way the order requested. I did not send the picture of Lucas's fingers wrapped around mine because there are some things that should not be exhibits. When Mark drifted toward memory, do you remember the farmer's market on South Congress? I steered us back to the map. Pediatrician appointment Tuesday, 10:30. Here's the address. Night made me braver, or maybe just honest. When the house was quiet except for the soft machine hums of modern life, I opened my laptop and added to the document named for me. I wrote what I was learning as if I were leaving breadcrumbs for a future woman who might find herself on a hospital corridor with a printout in her hand. Keep your records. Sleep when you can, not when you should. Eat the pie. Let people love you. Evidence is not vengeance. It's a boundary you can point to without raising your voice. One afternoon in late spring, when Austin air turns the color of heat and even the trees look tired, Mom and I took Lucas to Silker Park. We laid a blanket in the shade and watched a dog try to convince a frisbee to be alive. Lucas slept, the kind of deep sleep that makes you believe in angels even if you're not the type. I was studying a cluster of clouds that had decided to look like a parade float when I heard my name said like a question someone already knows the answer to. Elena? Jenna stood 3 feet away, hands empty, face bare of the makeup she wore to work. She looked smaller than my memory of her, which had always been lit with the soft filter reserved for confidences and the second glass of wine. For 1 second, exactly one, my body remembered how to meet her in the middle, where we used to exchange the daily weather of our lives. Then the second ended. "Hi," I said, because I was raised by a woman who believes in manners as a form of self-respect. She glanced at Lucas. Her throat worked. "He's beautiful," she said. The sentence bent under the weight of everything it wasn't carrying. She tried to smile. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything. I've stayed away." "You should keep doing that," I said, and I didn't temper it with warmth. "Truth is a kindness, even when it has sharp sides." She nodded, eyes pooling. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not the defensive kind, not the legal kind. The kind that sounds like a person is looking at the wreckage of a house they set on fire and finally noticing the family photos on the mantle." I didn't want her apology because it was a bill I didn't owe, but I listened to it because she needed to pay. "I thought," she started, then stopped. "It doesn't matter what I thought. It was selfish. It was cruel. You didn't deserve any of it." She swallowed. "He told me you were cold, hard to reach." There it was, the bedtime story people tell themselves when they want to be villains with better lighting. "What he told you about me," I said evenly, "was not an invitation. It was a sales pitch." She flinched. "You're right," she said. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to say it to your face. I am sorry." I looked at her and felt 2 things at once, which is a trick you learn in adulthood if you're paying attention. 1. The part of me that had braided her hair in college and held her hand in the ER after a bad flu and texted her too many memes wanted to put a blanket over both of us and pretend. 2. The part of me that had stood in a hospital hallway while my son drew his first outline in shadows knew that some doors must stay closed for a house to be safe. "Thank you for saying it," I said. "We won't be friends again." Her eyes said she already knew. She nodded and stepped back. "I hope," she whispered, "you get every good thing." It was the first sentence from her in a long time that didn't ask me to do any labor. "I will," I said, not vengeful, just certain. She left the way people leave church after lighting a candle, quiet, not absolved, but lighter because they told the truth to someone who could handle it. On the walk back to the car, Mom didn't ask what Jenna said. She squeezed my elbow, and I understood it as a benediction. I had kept my border intact without turning it into a wall so high it blocked my own sun. That night, I slept the kind of sleep that has no dreams because the day has already told you everything you needed to know. Weeks stacked. Summer arrived like a drumline, loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. Lucas learned to smile in a way that looked like he knew a secret he was saving for me. Mark asked for photos and received exactly the number the order required. He asked for an in-person visit, and Laura arranged a 1-hour window in the courtyard of the library under the oaks, where cameras record everything and no one expects privacy. He brought a small stuffed armadillo and cried when Lucas hiccuped. I watched, present without participating, and took a picture because that is what the paper trail now demanded. He tried to talk about us, about before. I redirected without drama. When the hour ended, I said, "Thank you for being on time," as if punctuality were an act of love. Sometimes it is. Bills were paid, diapers were bought. The world did not end, which turned out to be the most surprising part of the whole story. One afternoon, after a pediatrician appointment where Lucas endured his first round of shots with a grimace that broke and remade me, I opened my email to a message from Mark that was shorter than usual. "I've started seeing someone. It's not Jenna. I wanted you to hear it from me. It was the kind of note meant to sound responsible, and maybe it was. I sat with it for a few minutes and then replied, "Thank you for letting me know. Please follow the provisions regarding introductions per Section 6. Have a good day." Mom watched me type and sipped her tea. "That's a woman with walls and windows," she said. I laughed for the first time in days that felt ordinary. When the lease on my mother's spare room started to feel like a chapter heading rather than a paragraph, I began to look at apartments close to my school. Mercifully, the universe conspired. A small place on a quiet street opened up with light that knew how to be generous at 7 a.m. The first morning there, I ate toast on the floor with Lucas in his bouncer and the window open to a city that hadn't even had its coffee yet. I hung the ultrasound on the hallway wall where you have to pass it to get anywhere worth going. I left the wedding photos in a box in the hall closet because history belongs in archives, not in rooms where you breastfeed. Co-parenting settled into a rhythm of exchange that never pretended to be intimacy. Schedules were posted, times were kept. When Mark missed an email or tried to switch to texting for convenience, I forwarded the chain to Laura and returned to the riverbed. He adjusted. In the fall, his messages became less apologetic and more practical, which felt like a small mercy I hadn't known to ask for. I started therapy with a woman named Priya who had a plant on her windowsill that somehow stayed green in Texas. We did not talk about him much. We talked about patterns and ceilings and how some parts of me were built by girls who thought survival meant smiling. We talked about choosing to be loved in ways that did not require translation. She said, "You chose not to perform your pain, Elena. That's rare and tiring." I laughed. "I like rare," I said, "but I could do with less tiring." She smiled back. "We'll aim for both." In November, my class wrote thankful lists in crayon. One child wrote, "I am thankful for tacos and Miss Alvarez's baby." I taped it inside my cabinet door the way people tape prayers. I caught my reflection in the window one dusk and saw a woman I would have liked even if she weren't me. Tired, yes. Soft around the eyes, standing up straight without trying. The legal part of the story ended the way most legal stories do, with signatures and stamps and black ink that dries fast. The decree did not make a sound when the judge set down his pen, but something inside me did. A click, a soft latch catching. Laura shook my hand in the hallway and said, "Go home." I went to the park instead. There's a bench near the footbridge where the city pretends to be a postcard. I sat with Lucas, now a round-cheeked creature who believed feet were jokes. He clapped at a jogger. I told him we were a team. He drooled on my sleeve, which felt like agreement. A few days later, I ran into a teacher from another grade at HEB. She leaned toward the cart and made the standard cooing noises reserved for babies and puppies and new haircuts. Then she lowered her voice and asked, "Are you okay? I heard some things?" I said, "I am. The rumors were messier than the truth." She tilted her head. "You didn't torch anything," she said, a little surprised, a little admiring. "No," I said. "I built." She laughed. "That's slower." I thought about all the slow things that saved me. The nurse's steady hands, my mother's quiet, Laura's lines of text, Priya's plant. Slower, I agreed, and permanent. At home that evening, I took the ultrasound down from the hallway and replaced it with a photo of Lucas at the park, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. I slid the ultrasound into a shoebox with a few other artifacts, a copy of the temporary orders, the first onesie he outgrew, a receipt from the coffee shop where Jenna lied her first small lie to my face, the note from Mark with, "I'm trying." I labeled the box Archives because words matter. Sometimes I think about that hallway, about the version of me that could have walked around the corner and detonated. There's a timeline where I did that, where my voice was fire and their faces were ash. Maybe that timeline would have felt good for an hour, but this timeline built a house with a door only people who mean it can open. This timeline gave my son a mother who can teach him the shape of an apology and the cost of one too. This timeline learned that quiet is not the absence of power. It's power that doesn't need an audience. A few months later, after a parent-teacher conference night that ran long and too full of acronyms, I drove home on South Lamar and past the taco place Mark wanted to go to the day everything began. The sign out front said, "Taco Bout Fresh Starts," which is exactly the kind of pun I used to roll my eyes at. I parked anyway. I ordered something with cilantro and lime and ate it in the car with the window cracked while the city moved around me like a river that has better things to do than remember. At a red light, my phone buzzed with an email from Mark. "I appreciate your consistency with the schedule. Thank you." It read like a person who had finally learned that gratitude can be a sentence that ends with a period, not a hook. I wrote back, "You're welcome. Nothing more." It was enough. When I got home, Lucas was asleep, a small mountain range of blankets rising and falling. Mom was knitting something that might have been a scarf or might have been an abstract attempt at warmth. "How was your night?" she asked. "Quiet," I said, and smiled because the word had come all the way back to me. I washed my hands, turned off 3 unnecessary lights, and stood in the doorway of Lucas's room. The air felt clean in the honest way, not the lemon masking anything way. On the dresser, next to the baby monitor and a stack of board books with teeth marks, I kept a single index card. On it, written in the same block letters I teach my students, is a sentence I say to myself on the days when the past taps my shoulder. I didn't lose my voice. I used it to draw lines. That was the promise I made in a hallway that thought it could keep secrets. It is the promise I keep every ordinary day after, in the soft drumbeat of routines that ask for nothing flashy, only that you show up and hold steady. I don't need revenge to prove I survived. I have a crib against a sunlit wall, a photo with grass stains in the corners, an email folder labeled logistics, a mother who says little and means everything, a lawyer who taught me that a boundary is love wearing boots, a therapist who watered a plant and expected it to live, and a boy who laughs like the ocean when it realizes it can make shapes with the shore. We are not dramatic. We are durable. And in this house, that is better.